Welcome to EPZ Pathshala. I am Dr. Himanga Datta. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Linguistics and Contemporary English, English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Today we are going to learn the module Introduction to Dependency Phonology from the paper to Introduction to Phonetics and Phonology. So this module reflects on the basic concepts, themes and current research work associated with this genre of phonology, which is known as dependency phonology, which is a non-linear branch of phonological theory. If I tell you what is the history of this dependency phonology, it goes back to 1980s when the phonologists like Anderson and all, they felt the necessity of representing the segments in terms of head-modifier relationships, and thus this phonological theory came into practice. As you can see that dependency phonology, the name itself suggests that it focuses on the dependent relationship, right? The dependent relationship is between the head and the modifier. So you'll come to know as what is head and what is modifier and what kind of relationships we are talking about. Okay, so you should, whenever you learn a phonological theory, you should have some kind of technical terms you should be aware of, right? So dependency phonology, I have highlighted certain important key terms for your convenience, and these key terms are unary features, head-modifier relationship, decomposition, componentiality, and categorial gestures. If you see the keywords from the features itself, you can have an idea about what it talks about. As for instance, unary features. Like, what is unary feature? In generative phonology, you must be aware of the features called binary paradigm or the binary features. So it's just opposite of binary features. If we see a particular segment or particular unit in terms of either plus or absent, in terms of either presence or absence, we call it binary. But in dependency, what happens? Like, we don't see a feature in terms of the presence or absence, but in terms of unary. Whether it's present or absent. We are not taking in terms of plus minus, but a particular within brackets we are going to represent the feature, whereas the other features are absent. In the same way, the head modifier relationship, we are talking that the term itself talks about that there must be some kind of modification, there must be head and there must be modifier. So there must be some kind of asymmetric relationship holding between the head and the modifier, and it does indirectly talk about the dependent relationship, like something is where somebody depends on, relies on, and where is this a kind of modifier relationship. Decomposition means when a particular segment is categorized into subcomponents. So this is called decomposition. Componentiality, almost a similar concept. Componentiality means where different constituents are there. So different constituents can, give rise to different mixed segments or different kind of unique segments. So these are the key terms you should be associated with, which I'll be highlighted in our next slides. Dependency phonology drives home the fact that the components of a language are combined in an asymmetrical fashion where one component dominates the other. So there's a technical sentence. Now you should realize what it means. So components of a language are combined in an asymmetrical fashion. What it talks about? Because it is phonology, so here we are confined to the, the structure of the speech sounds. Right? Speech sounds are organized in a phonological string in terms of head modifier relationship or some kind of asymmetric relationship. All the segments are not equal in terms of phonetic cues, in terms of their occurrence in the prosodic positions. So it says that one component dominates the other. So you have to know that which component here we are talking about, whether it's the plosive stops or there is a kind of approximants. All these things you should know, like maybe in your previous modules that you must have studied about distinctive feature theory, you must be associated with the place and manner of articulation. But since it is a part of advanced phonology, here we are going to deal with like what kind of relationship there does exist between the kind of different segments in terms of place and manner of articulation. Is it just matter of articulation, or there must be some abstract principles, or there must be kind of acoustic principles operating, the segmental display, operating, the segmental distribution of the segments, which are instrumental in giving a kind of different shape and different parameter and different functions to the particular segments. So dependency phonology assumes that features are unary by nature, contrary to the binary feature aspect of generative paradigm. As I have already mentioned in the introduction, that it is just opposite to the sound patterns of English perspective that Chomsky and Halley, who were responsible for introducing the binary feature matrix of dependency phonology, a binary feature matrix of distinctive feature theory. So what happens, classical phonemics model, you have to go back little far to know about as how the phonological representations have emerged. The classical phonemics model, what they talk about, they say that the phoneme is the minimal distinctive unit in the sound system of a particular language. That is called phoneme. But with the emergence of the sound patterns of English in 1967, what happens that it's not the phoneme. According to them, it is a feature, which is the minimal distinctive unit in the sound system of a language. So it's a feature. So it's a kind of transition from, phoneme to feature. That distinctive feature theory, the proponents of distinctive feature theory, they believe that the features are represented in terms of plus minus. If I say, what is the distinction between pa and ba? What is the distinction between a and e? So you can say pa ba, it is plus minus, a e is a plus minus low, right? So you must have studied in distinctive feature theory. But here in dependency phonology, it goes a little far ahead, and they say that no, it is wrong to have plus minus features. We have to focus more on the monovalent and the unary features, which is more crucial and more important in terms of assigning, the importance of a segment in terms of its functionality. The unary features in DP are functional in determining phonological regularities. What do you mean by phonological regularities? That you have to be familiar with, right? What is phonological regularity? So we have different phonological processes in human languages, right? Different phonological processes means, why different phonological processes? Although we speak the same human languages, why we have different phonological processes? Then in answer to this question, we have to argue that each language is different from the other, right? One language X is different from language Y. What is the why is it so? Why language X is different from language Y? So in response to this question, we can say that is because of the parametric variation. One language is different from language Y. So one language doesn't share the same phonemic inventory the way the other language has, isn't it? So we have different phonemic inventories. So different phonemic inventories can lead to emergence of different phonological processes. Although here we can say that phonological processes are not, infinite. We can't have infinite phonological systems in the world languages. Phonological processes are kind of finite system, but still there's a kind of diversity in terms of phonological processes. So that means, but still there's a method, there's a mechanism in phonological theory to capture these regularities which are seen in across languages. That's why unary features or the monovalent features or unary features in dependency phonology are functional in determining phonological regularities. Means dependency phonology, in a better way captures the variations, captures the phonological, principles, as how the phonological principles operate in languages cross-linguistically. So DP analyzes minimal sequential units, segments or units into component properties generally known as features. These features best known as components are single-valued, unary and atomic. So here you have to know what are the features. So features are the atomic unit. They are the main unit, the main prime principles, and which constitute the components, right? And these components are single valued. There's no double valued. There's a single valued, unary, and atomic. Okay, so this is the kind of, for your convenience, I have given certain lines of thought that I'm going to share with you today in our class, like what is the outline of this course, right? So here, as far as the outline, introduction, dependency phonology, that we have done already. So dependency relations, principles of unarism and componentiality. So whenever people talk about a particular theory, so the teacher is supposed to talk about the main principles which are crucial for the theory. So in dependency relation, here we will be focusing on principle of unarism and principle of componentiality. Then dependency phonology also talks about categorial gestures and consonantal representations in dependency phonology. So the way consonants are represented, the way vowels are represented. So this is a kind of fascinating question on the part of phonologists, as how, so the rich tapestry of, this rich tapestry of the sound systems can be represented in a kind of very simple manner. That is, therein lies the challenge. So dependency phonology mostly talks about that kind of representative mechanism in human languages. So here we are going to focus on some data analysis, because without data analysis you won't have an idea what this theory talks about, right? So here we are taking some data in parentization. You must be knowing, as a phonological process, you should know what is parentization. That's the kind of when the phonological process in which, the plosives turn into fricatives. This is a kind of parentization, as how the change in plosives to fricatives can be represented in terms of dependency module. That will be our focus in this study. Okay, let's come to dependency relations, principle of unarism and componentiality. Sorry to say, but we have to focus on certain technical aspects, but I'll try to make it very simple for you so that you find interest in the subject, and especially in phonology. Okay, dependency phonology is a non-derivational theory of generative paradigm which takes into consideration the representation of phonological processes in the human language. Okay, this is a very technical thing, loaded with lots of information and loaded with lots of concepts and all. So let's see what it talks about. Non-derivational theory of generative paradigm. Obviously, it's a generative paradigm. It talks about post-SPE frameworks. Obviously, it has to be generative. What is non-derivational? First, you have to know what is derivational. Derivational phonology mostly talks about as how the sound systems, as how the speech sounds have a kind of two mechanisms, abstract phonological representations and the concrete phonetic representations. When a sound attains its phonetic manifestation, it has to undergo certain derivational steps. Like these derivational steps, but nothing but mental steps. So the phonologist has to apply certain derivational steps while they talk about the kind of abstract phonetic principle. But this leads to, and in kind of phonological rule representations, phonological rules, the earlier phonologists, generative phonologists talked about this derivational steps, which is very cumbersome and which is very difficult on the part of phonologists to focus on this kinds of derivational steps. So people always aspire for certain things which are very easy to represent. So dependency phonology has given an answer to this kinds of human queries, and it becomes like non-derivational theory. So if somebody asks you, is dependency phonology derivational or non-derivational? So our answer should be non-derivational, because it talks about the representation of phonological processes in a non-derivative manner. Next thing is Anderson and Jack Jonas. Who are the peoples who are associated with this concept, right? Behind every discipline, we have certain people whose contributions we should always remember. In any theory, whether it be in social science or any physics, chemistry, mathematics, wherever it be, there'll be some kind of people who are responsible. So in the school of thought, the dependency phonology, there are people like Jacques Durand and Anderson who are responsible, who can be called exponents of this dependency theory of representation. Dependency phonology assumes that segments are exhaustively decomposable into features known as components belonging to a universal set. As I have already told in the introduction itself, that it does not talk about the binary paradigm, it does not talk about the classical phonemics model, but it talks about the segments are exhaustively decomposable. Segments can be categorized into features, and these features are a kind of universal set. The notion of constituency, which is of prime concern in theoretical linguistics, is said to be derivable from the dependency relations coupled with linear precedence and rules of association. Okay, this is a very technical. Let me illustrate again. The notion of constituency. The constituency means, here we are not talking about political constituency and all. Here the constituency means the kind of components. If there's a kind of segmental speech sound, there must be components which are responsible for creating that kind of segment. In a segment, one will be the head, one will be the modifier. So this kind of constituency, so this kind of head-modifier relationship in linguistics, irrespective of all the disciplines of subdisciplines of linguistics, whether it be syntax, semantics, we are talking about the constituency relationship. So this constituency relationship is like people believe that is derivable, like it got derived from dependency relation coupled with linear precedence and rules of association. So there's a kind of linear precedence, there's a kind of one-to-one correspondence there, and there's a kind of rules of association. So one component is associated with the another component, right? So DP provides an explanation for relative degree of salience among the components of a segment found in languages cross-linguistically. So this is also a technical sentence which is loaded with lots of information. So you should understand what is the relative degree of salience. You must be aware of the concept of sonority, right? There must be the concepts of phonetic cues. The certain segments are considered to be more louder or is considered to be more noisier as compared to the other segments. What is this? Like, as for instance, if you see in the Pratt pictures, like the sibilants have created more noise marks in the Pratt as compared to the stops. What is so significant about this? So degree of salience, degree of this is the kind of strength asymmetries phonology that modern phonology tries to address. DP phonology, the derivation dependency phonology, has addressed this issue in a very suitable manner. So DP framework seeks to represent the minimal sequential units through the combination of unary features. In other words, DP seeks to explore the intra-segmental representation of the segments in the backdrop of underlying properties of the vowel components. So in a vowel, there are certain components hidden behind. So DP tries to focus on the inherent principles which are responsible for for the functionality of certain vowels. As for instance, we can see in languages that E, A, U, they are considered to be the optimal vowel sounds. Like you can in cross languages we can find these vowels are there. Even like Arabic, which has got the minimal vowel systems in the phonemic inventory, even Arabic has got this vowel. So what is the reason? Like not E is found not A, U is found not O. What is the reason for this? So dependency phonology has said that E talks about an inherent principle called palatality. This is also known as acuteness or sharpness. A is a lowness, which is also known as acoustic terms as compactness. U is a roundness, which is also known as gravity and flatness. So these above properties can be subsumed under resonance components. Through the application of the resonance components, it's possible to represent the simplest possible vowel system. Here I'm going to use a notation system which is used in dependency phonology, like E, A, U. How will you represent it? Within the curly brackets E, within slash, this is E is represented within curly brackets. That means I'm not saying here E is plus E minus A minus U. This is not the way of representation in dependency phonology, which can be the way of in distinctive feature theory, because here the E has the component called E, U has the component called U, A has the component called U, which is represented in the curly brackets here. The symbols in slanted brackets bear no systemic import but abbreviate the said descriptions of the left. Resonance components structure the vowel system. They are often referred to as tridirectional feature system in contrast to classical binary system, as we have already discussed. Okay, unlike binary features, unary features are not omnipresent via the attribution of a positive or negative value. In other words, segments under consideration may simply be characterized by the presence as well as the absence of a given component. As for instance, the segment A in DP is not comprised plus A minus E minus U, but simply within curly brackets A with the feature E and U absent. So here the things, whatever we have discussed with you, it is showing in terms of examples. Hope you have understood this. So the issue of unarism and the recognition of E, U and A as basic vowel is associated with a number of other approaches to phonology, such as radical CV phonology of Van der Hulst, particle phonology of Sein, government phonology of K, Lowenstein and Wagner. So what does it talk about? CV phonology is another branch of phonology, which is which is developed by a phonologist called Van der Hulst, and particle phonology of Sein he has developed, and government phonology can be attributed to K, Lowenstein and Wagner. So there's a kind of affinities between these all approaches. So here I am saying that dependency phonology, government phonology and particle phonology, they are not very different. In terms of representation, they have certain kinds of differences here and there, but the main motto and the main goal of this phonology is same, that is the representation, and they try to see the segments in terms of head modifier relationship and is a kind of componentiality. All these phonological approaches, including DP, hold the view that asymmetric relation between components and thereby implying indirectly the strength asymmetry is existing in the patterning of segments. So what is strength relation? So strength relations, I have already said, there's in phonological setup, there's always a kind of asymmetric relationship in terms of prosodic licensing, like whether a sound occurs in the onset, whether a sound occurs in the coda. So there's a kind of always asymmetry in terms of the triggering of certain phonological processes and the kind of segmental licensing. Or sometimes it happens that certain segments are not subject to alternation, whereas certain segments are subject to deletion or certain kind of phonological process. Why is it so? Is it because of the embedded inherent strength of the segment, or is it because of certain kind of prosodic features which are responsible for these kinds of alternations? So DP tries to focus on the notation system as which is more complex segment and which is more simple segment. So in a way, dependency phonology does not directly focus on the strength asymmetries and phonological patterns, but if we focus more on the strength segmental dimensions of strength asymmetries and phonological patterns cross-linguistically, then we have to say that DP in a way contributes to the understanding of this principle of strength asymmetries in phonology. DP differs from other phonological approaches like above in the representation of a segment in terms of how components are combined, as well as the identity of the components and other aspects of the organization. This is very clear. As for instance, I cannot say that dependency phonology is identical with government phonology is identical with particle phonology. Obviously there must be some differences, otherwise why we have different schools of thought in the discipline called phonology, why we have different optimality theory, dependency phonology, government phonology, we have the same principle otherwise. So what the reason behind the differences between the dependency, government and other approaches is that in terms of notation, notation system. Dependency phonology talks about certain different, categorial gestures, componentiality, which is not there in government and other phonology. DP recognizes the fact that components of a language can be combined in asymmetrical fashion. One component is more salient than other. So one component is more stronger than other. This strength of the component can be analyzed in terms of salience, in terms of phonological representations. Okay, here try to see one like some data set I have trying to bring for you. This is the kind of vowel system in Assamese. You must be knowing that Assamese is a language, it is Indo-Aryan language, is spoken in the northeastern part of India. So here I have tried to do the analysis of this vowel set, like E, A, U, O. Like try to see what are the main vowels here. E, A, and U, right? So how you will represent the mixed vowels? There's a kind of A. A is a kind of combination between two vowel properties. In the same way, O and is a combination between the two vowel properties. So how will you show? If you say E is not A is not A, that is not sufficient, right? So in dependency notation, how you will represent this kinds of mechanism is you can see the slide here within curly bracket and slash. If you saw E has a component of E, A, if you represent A, that means if E dominates A. Remember, E is a palatality and A is a compactness. So if lowness, like if palatality dominates lowness, then we get the A, and if R dominates E, that is lowness dominates palatality, we get A. So A is more close to A, isn't it? A is more close to E. If you see the tongue movement of the position of your tongue, when you produce E and A, it's more closer, and when you produce A and A, it's more closer. So in terms of this phonetic cues are represented in terms of dependency phonology in this way. So in this way, A, if you say like hak, if you say A is there, so if you say huki U, then U is there, is a prime constant. But if you say hun U, then if you say there's a kind of O, then U dominates A. This is a kind of roundness dominates A. That's the kind of we get this vowel. And if the O, hot O, then is the A dominates U, then we get this kinds of vowel. So this is, don't think that dependency phonology is a kind of abstract notion of something which has no connection, no empirical findings and all, no phonetic manifestation, no phonetic correlation. So this thing, if you see the vowel components, here you can see as how we produce the sounds. This is the kind of phonetics, the way we produce the sound with the help of the air articulators and all speech organs. But the thing is that as how you will represent in terms of phonological notation, there lies the challenge. So if you feel that, then we can show that E, A, U are the main vowels and others are the mixed vowels. So mixed vowels can be represented using this kind of phonetic notations in dependency phonology. So here I have already said that in this representation, A, O can be claimed as mixed vowels on the ground. They have more than two components in their configuration. In this kind of representation, one component is functioning as governor and other is dependent. So head modifier. So head modifier relationship is termed as governor and dependent. Governor means which governs and dependent is the governee. So if we say A, so here E is the governor and I is dependent. And if I is the governor and E dependent. For this representation, what is evident is that dominance in palatality gives rise to high mid vowel A, whereas lowness is dominance, we get the low mid vowel A, which we have discussed. Hope you have understood so far. So now we are moving to the categorial gestures and consonantal representation in DP. So in DP model, the major class of segments are represented by categorical gestures. This can be divided. So what is categorial gestures? This categorial gestures can be divided into two modules. One is phonetary subgestures and one is categorical gestures. Phonetary subgestures talks about the airstream mechanism. So you should not forget the airstream mechanism, which is responsible. The pulmonic airstream mechanism is aggressive airstream mechanism responsible for human speech. In most of the 95% of the human speech is produced like this. So, but categorial gesture talks about the voice, sonorance, consonantality, and continuance. So there are different features like plus continuant, plus consonantal, voice, sonorance. So we are going to discuss about this. So Anderson in 2002 claims that it is possible to draw a line of demarcation between different categories associated with manner of articulation, including voice, in terms of combinations of two components, V corresponding with periodicity and presence of a well-defined form and structure, and C involving reduction in periodic energy. So there's a kind of, differences in terms of C and V. If it is a V, that means it will have form and structures. If it is C, then reduction in periodicity. So there's a kind of phonetic underpinnings are very crucial in determining the phonological shape of different categories, whether it be vowels or consonants. So DP talks about these principles in a very systematic fashion. So intrasegmental representation of governance and dependence can be represented by a semicolon within DP model. As for instance, A is represented either governor and governee, or you can say here within curly bracket E semicolon A. So here whatever appears on the left is a governor and the other one is a governee. Then A as a I is a governor, E is a governee, because A appears on the left side of E. Here semicolon implies dominance. The notation used in DP adheres to the principle of componentiality assumption, which mainly typifies the representation of the internal structure of segments, optimizing the expression of phonological relationship, classes, regularities, and recurrent and natural. Because we are talking about this kind of phonological patterns here we are talking about. If it is a vowel, there's a kind of different properties. If it is a consonant, there will be different properties for this. So here you can see, have a look at the consonantal representation in DP module. Here you can see V represents vowels and the C represents voiceless plosives. So here you can see in terms of the vowel components, the sonority, we know the vowels are the most sonorous segments and voiceless plosives are the least sonorous segments. So here if you look at the kind of the presence of the V components, the vowel components, you can be sure that which is more sonorous and which is less sonorous. V represents vowels, and if it is liquids, liquids is the second most sonorous. So if the V, two VC components are mutually dependent on V, the nasals, the V component is there, voice, fricative voice. So there's a kind of transition from the vowels to the voiceless plosives. So the presence of the vowel elements determines, the representation of which is more sonorous and which is less sonorous. Here you can see that I have already given the notation and the kind of levels for this. The placement of particular segment types on the sonority scale is predictable from the representation of those types based on unary components and dependency relations. So you can see here, like from the sonority, the relationship of sonority and salience, it gets very much, clear representation in terms of DP modules. I already said that vowels are maximally sonorous and plosives minimally. So in unary notation, vowels are represented by the unique presence of the V component in the categorial gesture for C for voices. So why these things are important? Because if you go back to distinctive feature theory, it is not very easy to represent this kind of things in such a simple manner. So in dependency phonology, the whole paradigm of the segments in terms of vowels and consonants are represented in terms of in a very elegant and simple manner. Therein lies the challenge of the phonologists. Like then why this phonology, the schools of phonology have emerged to represent these kinds of phonological regularities in a very systematic and elegant manner. Therein lies the challenge. Okay, so here you can see the other segments involve co-presence of the two components, which can show weakening of the individual quality that characterize as intermediate. So between the vowels and the voiceless segments, in the slide you have seen there's a kind of co-presence. Certain segments are more vowel components, certain segments have less vowel components. So which in a way indirectly talks about the kind of weakening phenomena. There's a kind of weakening, there's a strengthening phenomena it talks about, and there lies the concept of strength asymmetries in phonology. However, intermediates are differentiated in terms of the relative preponderance of the two components. Obviously, relative preponderance means one component dominates other. There's two components, which component is more dominant in a particular segment, that determines our question. Relative preponderance is interpreted as a manifestation of dependency relation. The less preponderant consonant depends on or modifies the more. The more preponderant governs the less. So the relative preponderance is important. Here we will see some example here from the liquids differs from nasals in having V as well as C. Dependent on V, it is the more sonorous. The voice obstruents where obstruents are characterized as lacking a non-dependent V, show a dependent V. In addition to specific for this voiceless congener, the more does more sonorous. Latin acua becomes Spanish agua. Ka, ga, aga. There's a kind of ka changes into ga. Voiceless plosive turns the voice plosives, then it turns into voice fricatives, right? So in terms of representation, you can see the complexity. Ka, voiceless plosive, only C element. There's a voiced, so V components is there. When it becomes fricative, it becomes more complex. So this way you can show the the transition from voiceless stop to voice fricative. The similar kind of things if the kind of there's a change from fricatives to approximants to vowels. If you can show this representation, it becomes ooism. The vowel component is very higher, so you can see this term. So you can see the complexity in terms of the presence or absence of vowel elements. These two examples exemplify the progressive approximation to a vowel intervocalically in a highly vowely environment. In data analysis from this parentization and DP notation, you can see here the example is from Assamese, like cough turns into cough in the final position, pa turns into f, right? You can see the examples here. What is here? The aspirated stops in Assamese, pa and pa is parentized to fa and va in the end. So if we try to see these examples, let's see what is the analysis. So you can see the pa turns into fa. So here you can see the analysis in terms of C, then it's a fricative, fa, then pa. This above notation supports the claim of DP that unary features can provide more appropriate account of phonological regularities because the inherent complexity of a segment can be directly measured in terms of the complexity of its representation. So what we have learned so far. So dependency phonology, you should remember, is a theory of non-derivational theory. It tries to talk about representation, which also talks about the head modifier relationship. DP is also concerned about how the components are organized in a kind of asymmetric fashion. It talks about how one component preponderates over the other. DP relies on the assumption that phonological regularities can be better addressed in unary and monovalent features, unlike the distinctive feature theory of binary paradigm. And DP analyzes the intrasegmental representation in terms of categorial gestures, and you can see about different vowel components like palatality, lowness and roundness. The dominance of one quality component over the other gives us different vowel qualities. This is how different vowel qualities can be immersed, how the different mixed qualities of the vowels we can arrive at, we can establish through the principles of dependency phonology. So distinction between vowels in a language can be entitled by the presence or absence of unary perceptually based features. We have perceived that e, u, a is a kind of the main prime constants in a vowel. As far as the categorial gestures and consonantal representations are concerned, it mostly addresses the issue of relative preponderance among the segments, thereby addresses the notion of sonority, voice, markedness, lineation, as well as fortition. So all the phonological notions are addressed in DP module in a very systematic and on an explicit canvas. If you want to know more about the present on dependency phonology, you can refer to the e-text that we have provided. Thank you so much.